Have you ever been sitting in a crowded coffee shop or maybe just like walking through a densely packed airport terminal and suddenly your eye is just completely pulled in a specific direction?
Oh, yeah. Like your brain just locks onto something.
Exactly. You spot this, this shock of bright, fiery red hair all the way across the room, and it's almost magnetic.
It really is.
It just pulls your attention without the person even trying to be noticed. And I mean, if you stop and think about it, there is this strange, quiet power in how visually arresting that one specific trait
Oh,
is.
yeah, because it absolutely defies the background noise of a crowd, right? I mean, human vision is naturally drawn to contrast. So in a sea of brunettes and blondes, that copper or auburn tone acts almost like a visual siren.
Right, it's like a biological neon sign. And I was really thinking about that magnetic pull today as we prepare to jump into this deep dive. Because, if you're sitting there listening to this, you probably felt that exact same
Oh,
fascination.
everyone has.
Yeah. So, welcome back to another session of the Inquiry Talk. I'm so glad you're here with us because today we are getting into something so weird and fascinating. The sources we gathered on the biology and history of red hair present this incredibly bizarre, almost paradoxical relationship that society has with it.
Paradoxical is definitely the right word for it.
Right, because we are looking at a trait that is simultaneously intensely coveted right now, but also historically vilified in a major way.
The modern contrast is honestly pretty stark. I mean, you look at the salon industry right now, and the demand for artificial red hair is just massive.
Oh, it's huge. I was actually looking at the industry projections for 2026, and the top salon requests are entirely dominated by these vivid red tones.
Which is funny, considering how rare it is naturally.
Exactly. People are happily paying like hundreds of dollars and sitting in these salon chairs for hours just to walk out with shades that stylists are calling cherry cola or, sun-kissed copper. People actively want to manufacture that fire.
They're paying a premium for it.
Yeah. But then, when you turn away from our modern aesthetic obsession and look at the historical record of how natural redheads have been treated, the tone shifts so dramatically. Society has this extremely long track record of targeting them with bizarre superstitions and, honestly, genuinely cruel myths.
Well, it makes sense sociologically. When a physical trait is visually dominant, but also statistically very rare. I mean, we're talking about roughly 1 to 2% of the global population. It historically becomes a blank canvas.
A blank canvas for what, exactly?
For human anxiety. People project their societal fears, their fear of the unknown, and all their wild superstitions right onto that tiny demographic.
And those projections were entirely unhinged. I mean, reading through this stuff, it's wild. The ancient Greeks, for example, had this deeply ingrained belief that people with red hair would physically transform into these restless, vampiric spirits after they died.
Literally believing they would become vampires.
Yes. They thought the hair color was a literal marker of the undead.
Which is terrifying if you lived back then. But the Middle Ages carried that torch of paranoia even further. The aesthetic became deeply intertwined with moral panic.
Oh, definitely. You see that vividly in the art of the time. Renaissance and medieval artists deliberately began painting Judas Iscariot with red hair.
Right, to send a specific message.
Exactly. It was to visually symbolize betrayal and deception to a mostly illiterate public. It became a visual shorthand for untrustworthiness. And, it bled right into local folklore, too.
Oh, so.
Well, that pale, sun-sensitive skin that usually accompanies red hair, it was linked to vampirism again or cited as the physical mark of a witch. It was treated as this external biological sign of a deal with the devil.
Which naturally creates this massive ripple effect of prejudice. And sadly, we still see echoes of that historical targeting today.
We really do.
Yeah, the sources highlight these instances of modern gingerphobia where kids are still, bullied or ostracized simply for carrying a rare genetic sequence. The irrationality of it is fascinating from a sociological perspective.
The sheer scale of the reaction is what puzzles me so much. Why does a trait that represents just 1 to 2% of humanity provoke such a visceral, extreme response?
It's a great question.
Like, people love it, hate it, revere it, fear it, but the reaction is never just neutral. It really reminds me of the feeling you get if you spot a rare, formidable animal in the wild.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
You know what I mean? You freeze,
Yeah.
and your brain is instantly on high alert. I have to wonder if this fascination is purely about the statistical rarity, or if we are unconsciously responding to some deeper, ancient biological memory when we see that flash of red.
Well, that intuition actually points us exactly where the science leads. This isn't just a matter of cultural conditioning or some random aesthetic
It's
preference.
deeper than that.
Much deeper.
Yeah.
The human reaction to red hair is fundamentally tied to the biological history of our species. To really understand why it stands out, we have to look past those historical myths and examine the actual genetic blueprint.
And I spent a lot of time reviewing the genetic material you compiled for this deep dive, and the mechanics of it are surprisingly elegant. It essentially all comes down to a single gene acting as a switchboard.
Yeah, exactly. The MC1R gene, or melanocortin-1 receptor, which is located on chromosome 16, it's a highly sensitive genetic switch.
Okay, right. And for the vast majority of the human population, that MC1R switchboard is programmed to tell the body to produce something called eumelanin.
Yes, eumelanin.
That's a dark pigment responsible for brown or black hair and darker skin tones. Basically, it's the standard biological setting for humanity.
Right, the baseline. But in a very small fraction of the population, a recessive mutation occurs within that specific gene. The switch is basically flipped in the exact opposite direction.
Which changes everything.
Completely. Instead of producing dark eumelanin, the biological instructions change entirely, and the body begins producing pheomelanin.
And pheomelanin is the yellow-red pigment. It's what creates the copper and auburn shades, and it's also responsible for the significantly paler skin and, like, the freckles.
Exactly.
But, you know, knowing what the switch does doesn't really explain why it exists in the first place. The timeline of human migration seems to be the missing puzzle piece here, doesn't it?
Oh, the migration timeline is absolutely everything. If we rewind the clock to early human populations living in Africa, having high levels of eumelanin wasn't just common, it was an absolute biological necessity.
Because of the sun.
Right. It provided a thick protective shield against the intense, direct UV radiation of the equatorial sun.
Because that intense UV radiation is incredibly destructive at a cellular level, right?
Yeah.
It literally damages DNA and breaks down vital nutrients circulating in the bloodstream.
Specifically, a really important nutrient called folate. Folate is crucial for healthy cellular division and fetal development.
So without it, things go very wrong.
Very wrong. Without a heavy layer of dark melanin to absorb and block those UV rays, early humans would have suffered severe evolutionary consequences near the equator. But as populations began migrating out of Africa, moving northward into Europe and Asia tens of thousands of years ago, the environmental conditions shifted drastically.
Right, because they are walking into regions where the sunlight is suddenly striking the Earth at a much lower angle. The skies are persistently cloudy, the climate is colder.
Exactly.
And that previously life-saving biological shield of dark melanin suddenly becomes a major liability.
A deadly liability, honestly. Human skin requires a certain baseline level of UV radiation to synthesize vitamin D. If you don't synthesize enough vitamin D, your calcium absorption just plummets.
Which leads to terrible health issues.
Yeah, you end up with weakened immune systems and severe bone deformities like rickets. And in a harsh hunter-gatherer environment, rickets is basically a death sentence. The high melanin that protected them near the equator was now actively starving them of the weak northern sunlight.
Wow, so the environment essentially demanded a biological pivot. And when the MC1R mutation appeared, dialing down the dark pigment and dialing up the red pheomelanin, it resulted in almost translucent skin.
Which changed the game entirely.
Yeah. In Northern Europe, that mutation acted like a biological superpower. It allowed their skin to aggressively absorb whatever weak UV radiation was available so they could manufacture vitamin D.
It was an incredibly elegant evolutionary workaround. The mutation allowed early humans to thrive in environments that would have otherwise slowly destroyed them through nutrient deficiency.
But wait, that actually brings up a glaring question for me. I mean, I understand the mechanics of the adaptation, but I want to push back on the math here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If having pale skin and red hair was such an incredible survival advantage for living in gloomy, cloudy climates, why didn't the entire population of those regions adopt the trait?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Why is it only 1 to 2% globally? Even if we look at the geographical hotspots like, Scotland has the highest concentration, and it's still only around 6 to 13% of the population. Ireland is around 10%. Why didn't evolution just push it to a full 100% in those regions over tens of thousands of years?
That is the core paradox of this gene, and it all comes down to a really harsh evolutionary trade-off. We just discussed how pale skin maximizes vitamin D absorption. But we also have to remember the folate issue.
Oh, the nutrient that gets destroyed by the sun.
Exactly. Evolution is constantly trying to balance the scales. If an individual has too little melanin, Even the weak, angled sunlight of northern Europe during the summer can penetrate the skin deeply enough to destroy folate in the bloodstream.
Ah, I see. So it's a tightrope walk. If you have too much pigment in a cloudy climate, your bones fail because you lack vitamin D.
Right.
But if you have zero pigment, your reproductive success plummets because your folate gets destroyed by the summer sun.
Exactly. The human body had to find the absolute perfect equilibrium between synthesizing vitamin D and protecting folate. Evolution didn't push the red hair mutation to 100% because a mixed population offered a more resilient balance for survival across changing seasons and microclimates.
That makes so much sense. And there's also the mechanism of how the gene is actually passed down. The sources emphasize that this is a recessive trait.
Which means it can hide.
Right.
To be born with red hair, you have to inherit the specific MC1R mutation from both parents.
Yeah.
You can carry the gene silently your entire life without displaying the phenotype.
That's wild.
Yeah, in Scotland, for example, while only a small percentage actually have fiery red hair, roughly 40% of the entire population carries the hidden mutated gene.
Wow, 40%. It's basically a silent biological undercurrent. And, it isn't strictly confined to Celtic regions either. I found it fascinating that human migration scattered this gene in completely unexpected pockets across the globe.
It really did.
Like you see it strongly represented in the Udmurt people of the Volga region in Russia. There are even archaeological records of 4,000-year-old mummies discovered in the arid Tarim Basin of western China with preserved strands of reddish hair.
Because the gene traveled wherever human endurance took it. It's essentially a physical marker of where our ancestors walked and adapted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have this genetic switchboard that drastically alters your physical appearance, and we know that this appearance completely changes how society treats you from the outside. But the research we pulled goes somewhere I honestly never expected.
Yeah, this is where it gets really strange.
The MC1R mutation doesn't just change your hair color, it actually changes how you experience the physical world from the inside.
This is arguably one of the most counterintuitive discoveries in modern biology. The mutation in the melanocortin-1 receptor fundamentally alters the human nervous system.
Which is just crazy to think about.
It really is. It literally changes the baseline of how a person processes physical pain.
I was reading the National Institutes of Health studies you flagged, and I literally had to read the data twice. The idea that a gene controlling hair pigment could simultaneously dictate pain tolerance just feels like a massive biological glitch.
It sounds entirely fictional, right? But the clinical data is overwhelming. The research, which was conducted both in human trials and with genetically engineered mice carrying the exact same MC1R mutation, revealed profound systemic differences.
Okay, the statistic that immediately jumped out to me was the anesthesia requirement. The studies show that natural redheads often require about 20% more anesthesia to be fully sedated during surgery or major dental procedures.
20%.
20%. That is a massive clinical deviation.
It's significant enough that anesthesiologists and oral surgeons actually use hair color as a diagnostic marker to adjust their dosages before they even start.
Wait, really? Just based on hair color?
Yeah. Redheads are notoriously resistant to local anesthetics like lidocaine. And they also exhibit a much higher sensitivity to thermal pain.
Meaning temperature.
Right, meaning they process hot and cold temperatures more acutely than the general population.
Yeah. But here is where the data gets incredibly confusing for me. They are sensitive to temperature, and they actively resist numbing agents. So logically, you would assume they just have an incredibly low pain tolerance across the board, right?
That would be the logical assumption.
But the research says the exact opposite. They possess a higher overall tolerance for certain types of physical pain, like pressure or electrical pain. And even more strangely, they require significantly lower doses of opioid painkillers to achieve relief.
Yeah, it's a total paradox.
External opioids are much more effective on them. How can you be harder to numb but easier to treat with opioids? It doesn't make sense.
The contradiction is resolved when you look at the biochemical architecture.
Yeah.
The key lies in a specific parent protein called POMC.
Oh, right. I saw POMC mentioned repeatedly in the literature. From what I gather, it acts as a precursor, like a raw biological material that the body uses to manufacture other things.
That's a perfect way to look at it. Think of POMC as a large, uncut block of biological material. In a typical body, the cells chop this POMC block up into several different, highly specialized hormones.
Okay, I'm following.
Some of those newly cut hormones are dispatched to stimulate MC4R receptors, which are essentially responsible for heightening our perception of pain. They make us more sensitive.
So part of the POMC block is used to increase pain signals.
Yes. But other pieces cut from that exact same POMC block are dispatched to stimulate the body's natural opioid receptors, which actively block and dull pain.
Wow, okay. So it's an internal balancing act. The body produces its own pain increasers and pain blockers from the exact same raw material.
Precisely.
But how does the MC1R mutation disrupt that balance?
Well, because of the mutation, the cells in a redhead secrete much lower levels of that raw POMC material to begin with. The factory is basically running low on supply.
Oh, I see.
Because there's less POMC to chop up, the body doesn't produce enough of the specific hormone that triggers the pain-increasing MC4R receptors.
So the pain increasers are essentially understaffed.
Exactly. However, the opioid receptors, the natural pain blockers, are still fully functional, and they have other separate biological pathways keeping them active.
So the biochemical scales simply tip. Without the normal volume of pain-increasing signals to fight against, the body's natural pain-blocking system is operating with far less resistance.
You nailed it.
Their internal opioid system is essentially boosted.
It's a cascading biochemical effect. Because their baseline opioid receptors are operating without the usual interference, any external opioid medication introduced into the system works exponentially better. That single pigment mutation completely rewires their sensory baseline.
It is genuinely staggering to think about. I am imagining you, listening to this right now. Maybe you have red hair, or maybe you grew up feeling kind of alienated because your pale skin and freckles made you a target for teasing.
It's a common experience.
To realize that this aesthetic difference isn't just cosmetic, that it is a deep systemic rewiring of how your body processes the physical world, it shifts the entire narrative. It's not just a color. It is a completely different way of inhabiting a human body.
It really frames the trait in a completely different light. When you connect the genetic origins with the physiological reality, red hair is no longer just a biological quirk or a passing salon trend. It represents a living relic of human survival.
A living relic. I love that phrasing. The historical timeline certainly backs that up too. We are looking at genetic variants that are tens of thousands of years old. And there was a detail in the archaeological data that really hammered this home for me.
The Neanderthal connection.
Yes, they have actually analyzed the fossils of Neanderthals recovered from Spain and Italy, dating back over 40,000 years.
And those Neanderthal genomes contain their own distinct version of the MC1R mutation.
They independently evolved a mutation that produced the exact same effect, that pale skin and fiery red hair. It means this specific aesthetic has belonged to entirely different branches of the human family tree.
It's incredible.
This biological flame has survived the freezing, sunless environments of the Ice Age. It has been carried across continents on the backs of early nomadic tribes. It has outlasted the rise and fall of major empires, and it has endured centuries of medieval persecution and superstition.
It is a profound testament to biological endurance. I mean, every freckle and every strand of red hair is quite literally a biological echo of ancient survival.
It really is.
The ancestors who first carried that mutation adapted to harsh, unforgiving worlds, and they passed that specific resilience down through countless generations, straight into the modern era.
If you carry that gene, you aren't an outlier or a historical target. You are carrying a highly resilient, unbroken map of human adaptation right there on your head. It's literally a badge of honor. It genuinely changes the way you look at a crowd, doesn't it?
It changes everything.
You think you're just observing different hairstyles, but you're actually looking at a living mosaic of how our species managed to survive the planet.
And honestly, exploring that mosaic leaves us with a rather haunting question.
Oh. What do you mean?
Well, we've just spent this time unpacking how a single, seemingly superficial mutation for hair pigment secretly dictates something as deeply internal as our threshold for physical pain. It forces you to wonder what else is hiding in the human genome.
Oh, wow. What other invisible traits, inherited from ancestors who sheltered in caves or crossed ancient ice bridges, are silently shaping our daily experience of the world right now?
Exactly.
Are there ancient biological switches dictating our moods, our modern fears, or maybe even how we perceive the passing of time? We are walking around, interacting with each other, totally unaware that we're running on this invisible, ancient operating system.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. I'm going to let that thought settle for you, because it is a lot to process. It is exactly the kind of realization that changes how you view the people passing by you in that crowded coffee shop. We are all carrying these hidden histories.
We really are.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If exploring these hidden narratives and unpacking the biology behind our daily lives sparked something for you, we gently encourage you to follow along and maybe like the video. We will be back next week with another deep dive to help you rethink the world around you. Until then, keep wondering. See you next week.